to the October version of the Salesforce Business Analyst Virtual Trailblazer Community Group. Global. Many words that all define this amazing group of people that we have today. We are excited to bring you delivering empathetic and joyful user experiences. I wish our group name was a little bit easier to deliver, but it is the name that Salesforce has given us, and we're glad that you're here today. First, some housekeeping items. The meeting will be recorded, edited, and posted on YouTube. Please check out our Bad SBA channel. We have over 600 subscribers now. I've been decently good about getting stuff up within a month. Sorry, I'll try. If you nag me, I will get it up faster. If you chat, we will do our best to keep up in the chat. Please raise your hand if you want to speak, and Q&A for questions, which I will start the Q&A right now. Daniel has indicated that he wants this to be super interactive. So Daniel, do you want to give them some guidelines as far as how you'd like that interaction to look like during your session?
Yeah, there will be, at any time you want to put anything in the chat or come off mute, that's fine. As well as you'll see, I have these audience participation encourage prompts.
All right, cool. So, agenda introductions. We're going to have Daniel's presentation on delivering empathetic and joyful user experiences, followed by some Q&A. I've got a lot of ranting to do on the Salesforce BA news and opportunities, and then we'll have some time, hopefully, for some off-camera, well, not off-camera, off-recording, Baba chit-chat. Also, I just noticed that Vera Bhavani, who I am not connected with, but I hope is out there somewhere in the universe, being awesome, has turned into our 2000th member. So we have 2000 members globally. Very excited to at least acknowledge that. I did not have anything particularly prepared. I just noticed it right before the meeting, but thought it was worthwhile to mention. So we're grateful to all of you for being here. Who am I? Well, I'm Vanessa Grant. I'm also back to business analysing and scrum mastering. I'm on a project until next June, and excited to be back in delivery and actually writing user stories and requirements on a day-to-day basis. So that's me these days. And I am leading this group with Pay. Paging Pay. Pay, I don't hear you. Okay, Pay's frozen. So I'll introduce Pay. Do I have a pay phone? Thank you, Jason. So Pay is a 3 times author of the 101 series for Salesforce books, Discovery, Successful Salesforce Projects, and Salesforce Consulting 101, which everybody should check out, has been released within, I think, the last month or so. She's also relaunched the Zenhow Academy, and I thoroughly recommend checking her out. She has done so much in this ecosystem and is probably, I would say, next to Daniel, 2 of the most empathetic people in the Salesforce ecosystem we have on the call today. So everybody get those feelings out. And Daniel, we will, I presume you have an intro slide, Daniel?
I do.
Okay, well then I will gloss over this and say we're really excited to bring Daniel. Daniel's also writing a book, but he's a principal strategist and Salesforce architect. And we're really excited to hear about his take on joyful user experiences today. And with that, Daniel, I'm going to pass it over to you and stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here with you all to have a great conversation. Let me go ahead and do the share screen. Okay, great. I think I see the slide up. Does it look okay on your end?
Looking good.
Well, love having you all here. Welcome to Delivering Empathetic and Joyful User Experiences. Why the session? You know, our users really do deserve the best experiences possible. It allows them to be more productive with fewer clicks. They can make more informed decisions with actionable data. And I really have a passion for helping people focus more time and energy on their talents and passions for making a difference. So I think anything that we can do to center on the holistic user experiences that people have has a lot of payoff to making sure that systems and technology and interactions that people have really do work well for them. So let's see. Okay, so for today's agenda, I'll start with centering us on what do we mean by being inclusive and intentional with change management. We'll get into the heart of what's empathetic, what's joyful, being mindful that I'm sure that means a lot to different people from the experiences that we all have. So it'd be great to hear what you all think of that. And then what I'll do is I'll walk through, for example, an implementation or the evolution of a Salesforce system, the different phases of that. And along the way, we'll have practical ways that we can empower and delight users. I'll briefly touch upon some categories of Salesforce features that can help us enhance the user experience. And then I'd like to include possible outcomes. You know, when we talk about empathy and joy, what does that translate to in terms of maximizing the value of a system like Salesforce? And then, you know, throughout as well, we can have Q&A and I'll have some resources. Okay, so this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. If you see this slide, but also at any moment, this means that audience participation is encouraged. And why? Because I believe in the collective wisdom of audiences and all of you. You know, there's so much to learn with technology, so much happening within the Salesforce platform, for example, so much change going on in our lives. And I think, you know, one of the amazing strengths of user groups like this and all of you out in the community is that we can share what we're learning, whether it's day zero and you're brand new to the ecosystem or you've been, you know, on the Salesforce platform for 10 or more years. There's always a lot that we can teach and share with each other. And that generosity in our community has been wonderful. So a little bit about me. I choose a picture there. That's of Logan Airport. It's the Boston area. I love it because it gives this zoomed out view. But also we're trying to land, in this case, on a runway. And so there's a lot of detail involved. So aviation is a passion of mine and travel. So I thought to include something that resonates with me. I'm a small business owner of DHG Holistic Solutions, where I like to focus on data, human, and goals as the pillars. I've been at the intersection of people, technology, and data for over 20 years. And so you can see on screen some of the areas that I'm passionate about, would love to connect, and especially on the human-centered design that we're talking about today. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2016. It's been quite the amazing journey. You know, just tremendous amount of support and what we can all do together. And I'm very grateful for that. And I am a lifelong learner. And so while I mentioned certifications, I think the practical experience and being curious has really been what's helped me throughout my career. All right, so I want to start and ground us in inclusive and intentional change management. What do you mean by that? And so this is the first audience participation moment where you can come off mute if we want to try that, put in the chat. I really want to hear from you. What are some ways that you feel we can be inclusive and intentional with change that people go through? How can we include a variety of people and how do we make change a priority? And thank you for all those nice comments in the chat.
Well, I think change starts with getting feedback.
Being feedback.
Getting feedback, yes.
Getting
So,
feedback. Yep.
yeah, I joined a few minutes late, so I don't know if there was a leading up question to that, but overall, how can we be inclusive with change is really understanding what people are looking to change, and then how is that going to affect different people with different needs. So all that I think is feedback and a little bit of Q&A.
Absolutely spot on. I'm seeing be transparent. Ways to get feedback is a theme that I keep seeing in the chat. Getting the correct and appropriate stakeholders involved in their input, absolutely. Putting the humans first, honoring each person as they are, and meeting them where they're at. I love that. Listening with an open mind, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Being an empath, it's about how people feel and listening, receiving input should be encouraged at all levels of development, from discovery to implementation. Conversations, being patient, listening more, talking less, inviting questions, understanding how roles of various within the organization operate and use Salesforce, being supportive. I love it. Absolutely. So, you could all be reading the slides because you nailed it. And I love how you all add to the conversation too. I just want to, I just also parking the ego. I'm huge about that. There's so much to learn and do. We can't all know it all. And so, again, to learn from our users, which I think is one of the main points of business analysis, is just incredible gift to hear from people who go through their workflows and interactions with colleagues and customers on a day-to-day basis. So this is considering all humans throughout a project. So inviting in the feedback and the input where we can. So that would mean users across the organization. I know sometimes Salesforce begins as a system that's introduced for one department and sometimes it then expands out to be used by other departments. And I think what's important there is to realize it really is one system that's serving the needs of the organization and the people that work within it. I saw within the chat, how do we think about the personas, the different roles that people have in a system where they share in common similar goals and needs and ways of working, but also there's likely very different, uses and departments. And so again, understanding the full impact of all the people involved is really, really important. I think about delivering for various learning styles and needs. Some people like visual or auditory, or to tinker around with the system, or they want time to explore, or they want to be able to come into a open office hours and ask questions. And so thinking of the various ways that we can meet people's needs, which then ties into accessibility. And within some of the resources and the trail mixes that Salesforce has, there's some great information out there about accessibility. So again, to be able to meet everyone where they're at. And I absolutely love the variety that I've experienced with different comfort and experience levels with technology. I know some people hate tech, love tech, ambivalent about it, apathetic about it, love it, new to it, have been using it for years. And I would guess that most people who are using a system like Salesforce have a variety of other talents and human interactions that we want a system like Salesforce to help them focus more on. But again, this is all about centering on the variety of people that we can bring in. And I've been on projects, I'm sure you all have too, where there's too few stakeholders at the table. So I love that you belong there. And being intentional is really making this a priority. Again, I consider this to be where we're talking about change management. How do we help people navigate change is a core fundamental of a technology implementation and evolution. We have to make it a priority. I know it takes time. I know it takes money, just like the importance of business analysts, right? How do we carve out that time? Because we then have a way in which we're understanding what humans go through and what they need. And so sometimes, regardless of the size of the organization, maybe it's a few people, maybe it's larger business units, you can convene a governance group or an advisory group. So for example, people might come together, every other week or once a month to talk about the major upcoming milestones within the business. And let's say, like maybe peak holiday season, and what is that shared vision that we want to create together, and how do we make sure that we're prioritizing what needs to be done, in being mindful that there's a lot of moving parts with the system like Salesforce. And here's where I believe it's really important to partner with leaders for support. Now, I've been in projects where leaders have more of a mandate that we're going to do this, and it definitely does require leadership buy-in and support for sure. But I think it's a partnership where we're building, again, that shared vision together. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? And what support and resources do we need to be successful? A system like Salesforce is going to mirror the business. So if there are silos or differences of opinion, which we want to welcome to an extent, right? But also break down the barriers so that we can implement and use this system in a way that's effective for everyone. And so again, tech doesn't solve that alone. It can help, but by having change management be a priority, we can look for ways to improve how we work together as well. And so, I'd like to think of the key stakeholders. Maybe that's by department, it's super users, it's also bringing in someone who's like, I really don't know about this change, and bringing everyone to the table so that we're getting a variety of perspectives. I understand, though, I can imagine some of the feedback around that is the more people involved, right, the more intensive it can be or longer it can take. And that's true. So there's a balance. Figuring out how do you make sure you have enough representation, and definitely including end users in that, in my opinion. To me, being intentional, though, is also about being transparent and setting realistic expectations. We cannot do everything within even the best implementation projects out there. There will always be a version 2. There will always be a need to, ship what we can. And so I like to ground us in ways that we can be transparent. And maybe, for example, that includes that people can see the roadmap, or they can see their user stories. They can, when they submit feedback, they can see the status of it and know that, okay, I haven't been forgotten. But then there's realistic expectations we need to set about what can be done within a specific period of time. That's one of the constraints of projects is, balancing the scope and the resources and the time that we have. And so that will mean trade-offs. And again, I think if we can center on what are the priorities within the business and that the different groups need and how do we come together, it has made a difference for a more successful rollout and then a follow-up phase. Okay, now about empathy and joy. I love this picture of the tree because we really here are talking about the holistic experiences. The user interfaces, as we'll get into, are very important too, the screens that people interact with. But here I mean the holistic experiences. So we have the tree here with the roots and the sunlight coming through and the branches and the leaves and probably bugs and everything else going on there. And so that to me is sort of an analogy for systems. There's a lot of moving parts for sure, but here we're being focused on human-centered interactions. So when I mean holistic, what are people feeling, thinking? How are they navigating the change? What are they looking forward to? And then, yes, user interfaces. How do we reduce clicks? No one, when they're viewing or entering or, receiving back information, want to go through lots of button presses if possible. And so, there are ways that we can design screens. For example, one of my favorite, probably a little spoiler for later, but I like, quick action buttons, for example. So instead of hitting the new button and seeing, 300 fields, which I hope we don't have on an object, but, it's out there. Sometimes it's needed. I'd like to present at that moment in time, what is the 4 or 5 or whatever, 10 pieces of information that we need? And are there ways the system, depending on what button you've clicked, right, can pre-fill in some of that? Maybe it's today's date or value. But with the holistic experiences as well, we're talking about people's goals and motivations. So when you get to persona, part of that exercise is figuring out what do people want to accomplish within the system, and then what are the motivations and how can we help people navigate that change in using a system that works for them. There will be lots of thoughts and feelings along the way. I think, again, if we have a respectful way that everyone can work through what their needs are and to advocate for what they feel would make a difference, that definitely goes a long way. But that also is the transparency of, hey, I've given you input and feedback. What happened to that? If the answer is maybe not right now, why is that the case? Or might there be something else that you're hearing that could be a better solution? Or is that just something where we might need to hold on it? Because there actually might be something else that you've asked for that we definitely want to make sure we complete on time. And then here, again, you'll keep seeing the themes of change management, but it's prioritizing that and training, because along the way, people can be learning and seeing a system like Salesforce. So rather than the days of the past with technology where we might get requirements, go off and build them for a while, I'm talking months with, back in the day. And then by the time you hand it back to the business, so much could have changed, or maybe people didn't have a chance to think through all of the possibilities because it was like a short interaction, right? And so again, throughout, these are more opportunities for people to see the system and to give their input. Okay. Empathy. I like the how are you, really? Because here we're understanding people's needs and their feelings and goals. And I know that definitely gets on the soft skill side, but it definitely, in my experience, pays off for the business outcomes that we're all trying to achieve together. Empathy, from my experience, is the foundation of those collaborative working partnerships where, we really are thinking through what we each in the business need. It's not personal. It can be, right? It can be really important for us to have ideas and feedback, but also to understand where we're coming from. And that I love to ground that users wear multiple hats. They have a lot going on within their role, within the technology projects that we have, within their lives. And so, I'm mindful of that. I've been on projects where people are running whole departments at the same time that they're doing several changes within their organization and with the tech all at once. And it's a lot. It's a lot for people to navigate those changes. It's a lot to learn. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we can make learning more joyful as well. I like to always ground myself in staying humble and curious. I don't have all the answers. And being a technologist who has the empathy and the human side just means that there's more for me to learn. So we heard within the chat before, right? Do a lot more listening. And typically, when I've been in organizations internally, it's not my system, it's our system. I'm here to provide a technical opinion or solutions, consider trade-offs and what we might need. But at the end of the day, I want it to work for the business, and they're the experts. Our end users and the stakeholders and leaders, they're the experts on what the business needs. And so by staying humble and curious, it's opened up these moments where users have taught me so much. You've probably maybe heard of, the Salesforce admin by walking around concept, but basically, sort of shadowing or asking people, hey, how do you do that? And, you learn a lot about how a system is and is not working for someone by seeing, how they're trying to navigate the goals and the workflows that they have for the day. I really think it's very important as an empathetic person, and I've not always been great about this, to be honest, is to prioritize self-care as well. When you're working with people and you're got a lot of feelings and needs and interactions happening, I love to take time to recharge, and I have to be better at that, because then it allows me to then be fresh and at my A game the next time we have an interaction. So if you might have met me at Salesforce events, I can sometimes, when I go into a room, be a little quieter. I'd like to kind of get a sense of the room, and then I immediately flip to extroversion, because I'm like, what can I do to make people's experiences at this conference, for example, better? And then guess what? Maybe I don't even make it to the 5 o'clock whatever, because I now need to go back up, to the room and recharge or go on a walk, to the Golden Gate Bridge when I was at Dreamforce of the years past. Just what can you do to also prioritize time for you? I think it's very, very important in this day and age. There's so much going on. Okay, this does not have to just be with technology. It can be. But what are examples in your everyday life as well of a joyful experience you've had? What made it joyful to you? So I'll give you an example. There was, an example of I like to go into stores, but this one store that I went into happened to have a drive-through, and I'm like, okay, I'll give that a try. And typically when I would go into stores for this particular experience, the wait time could be 15, 30 minutes at times, long lines. The drive-through, went up to the window, this is what I need, and went about my day. It was just a small example of an interaction and an experience that was designed really, really well, and hopefully allowed, on both sides, a faster but higher quality experience. So yeah, what are examples I'm seeing? Birthday trips to visit my nephew, excellent. Role play with admissions department users at university.
I think
Dinner
also,
recently. Mhm.
I think also when people actually use the information that you've taken the time to give them and make it a little bit more personal, and then expeditious is always a joyful user experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I can actually convince the telephone or the chat bot that no, I really would like to talk to a human. I've considered the possibilities, and it's like, okay, no problem. It is so much more joyful than I've been on computer systems that actually hang up the call. They're literally, I won't name the company, there is no way to ask it to talk to a person. And every time I've tried different paths, it literally hangs up. So there's a night and day difference, right?
Yeah, I've tried the same. I actually I tried an angry voice because a lot of the recording systems are picking up your tone. So I thought if I got angry, then they would transfer me. It did work one time. So
That's interesting. Yeah. Allison, I see your sunset beach walks, nature, nature, nature. Yeah, the more I am with technology, the more I actually enjoy just going for walks or, out to the mountains. It surprises me because I was never much of an outdoor kind of person. Going to Japan and not tipping was a joyful experience. Walking dogs, including Allison, your Oliver, that we all love. Beautiful fall colors. That's definitely happening in New England, for example, here. Cooking classes, working remotely, doing something good for someone else. I mentioned that to a family member recently. It's like, you're not a burden. It's actually joyful that if there's something I can do, or just be with you, right? And help ease something along your journey actually helps me feel like I accomplished something really amazing today. So absolutely. Seeing examples of amazing websites and chat support, I mean, it just makes all the difference, right? When you're treated like a human and you're able to get what you need. Um, so yeah, joyful, you're all definitely all on the same page here. And it's interesting, again, though, right? We have these common human experiences and also what's unique and joyful for each of us. Back in the beginning, I mentioned this to me is about delighting people with more time for their talents. They may love Salesforce, and that's great, but I can imagine they are in their roles with a lot of other amazing skills and abilities and experiences and passions, and including, especially the AI era, in my opinion, for us to have more meaningful human interactions. So anything we can do to save people time and effort adds value and makes lives better. That should be the whole point of technology implementation, in my opinion. I like to delight people with good surprises. So maybe it's that, hey, wow, I did not expect to be able to reach that human that quickly within the AI system, or someone understands, where you're coming from, or something within, maybe a report or a chart or a dashboard you bring up. It's like, oh, wow, that's really interesting to see the information that way. Joyful experiences, in my opinion, are intuitive. People have an understanding of what's expected of them in that moment. Like I mentioned, when you hit the quick action button, maybe you're presented with just 5 fields. Okay, yep, I just need to do that right now. And then, for example, the path feature in Salesforce later on, they can know, okay, the next step for me is to go have this conversation and gather these other data points. I think we've all been with systems where it just feels natural, and other ones where you really do feel like you need to go consult a guide. It's interesting. Smartphones are a little bit like that. I find it amusing, when the new features come out every year with some of the phones, and there's actually some really interesting features buried in there that aren't well advertised. And I'm like, how are people supposed to find those? For example, a lot of the phones have quite a large amount of accessibility features. I was showing some people some of those the other day. For example, when you're in a car, some of the phones have visual cues that move around on the screen to help reduce car sickness when you're using your phone during travel. Just things like that are, how would you know that unless it happens to be intuitive? But when not, we can help show people. We can get into some of that too. But again, fewer clicks. No one really probably wants to be in menus. I can remember working with a enterprise system that just to print something was mind-boggling. There was no like file print menu. It was a series of commands, and you had to remember the printer's alias, and just to get a printout was amazing. Helpful guidance and feedback along the way. Sorry, that's what I was mentioning from before. We have, we can put a rich text piece in, or there's different, features like path or the help text for people to know, okay, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm going to go. Okay, great, I did this correctly. And I do believe technology could be fun and empowering along the way. There are ways, you might hear things like with emojis, the confetti for sure, but also just in the design, using branding, for example, or, giving people, again, the positive reinforcement along the way. Okay, I'm on the right path. So let's walk through, for example, a typical project from start to end and practical ways we can empower and delight users. So I'll start with strategy. I like that picture of the mountain there. We're up maybe on a cliff or a clearing, and we've come a long way, and we can see, okay, where are we going next? And that to me is strategy, is that we are iterating on governance, the convening of people together about what we want this technology system to do, and the change management side of that. Again, we have to have that shared vision and values. If everyone's approaching it in silos instead of coming together and representing what they need, it can be a longer road. And so, how do we center on involving the business subject matter experts? Again, I really think they know the business way better than I do, and I would love to hear from them as to what are they seeing and needing. If we're moving from another system, what was it about that prior system? And being honest about, what was it from the human side, the organizational side, and the technology side, so that we don't repeat what wasn't causing joy before. And I love conducting or joining, being a fly on the wall with focus groups. I don't take it personally when I'm in a group and everyone's talking about a system that, I've had a hand in architecting or building, and giving honest feedback. This is their system, and I want to understand where it's working and where it's falling short for their needs, so that we can come up with a plan. And I think of you, Allison, on the line with the data and donuts here. We have to have an excellent data strategy and outcomes and great quality data. Don't forget to think through, what is the information we really need to understand our business, our people, our day-to-day tasks, and build the model and the security and everything around that. What are those dashboards and reports or visuals, for example, the questions that I'm going to need to answer when I'm using this system? And then you back from there with the business requirements to then figure out, how are we going to build this? And then again, we may not be able to do it all at once. So there's definitely very helpful, again, about being transparent and setting expectations, to have a roadmap and to think about the phases of the project that we're going to go through and how do we prepare for them. And, knowing the system architecture and landscape is important. Salesforce is usually and typically not the only system, and it's not always supposed to be the source of truth or the center of everything. But when it is, we want to understand where it fits in, what other systems are around it, what's being done manually, what might we be able to automate, or what kind of integrations are existing out there. So often I like to start with it's amazing how a visual of that alone, in one project I'm thinking of, really centered on, like, wow, this is why we're doing this. Because look at this, all the lines drawn from the current system out are all manual uploads, downloads, and movement of data. And wow, phase one with Salesforce now at the center and connected to our marketing system is exactly those kind of pain points that we were trying to solve. So to see it visually was really interesting. But again, I like to think of this Mount Everest sort of picture or analogy and help people, build bridges from the old to the new. And that's a great question I'm seeing in the chat. And again, if others have thoughts specifically on anything, and I think we really learn well together, what are best practices, right? Business requirements, documents do you think we should use? What are some best practice business requirements documents you think we should use? And I think for one of them, again, I think is about the system architecture. I think there are great templates. We'll get into a little bit about user stories. There's great formats for us to put the business needs into language that's centered on people. So we can get a little bit into that. I think it's coming up. So here, I like that question mark. I'm thinking of all the business analysts here. All of us have that within our role to an extent, or it may be what we're solely focusing on. But this is about asking questions. Let's discover and learn and design this system in a way that's meeting people's needs and best practices. And so what I mean by best practices is just the way in which we design a system that's going to scale and provide people that information back. And those best practices include what we've been talking about, the change management fundamentals and setting a vision with people. So again, I like to think of the human and the technical fundamentals that allow us to have a system that's going to meet people's needs. I love, and I'm getting better and better at it, still more to learn with user stories in that format. It didn't feel as natural to me initially because I'm back in sort of the computer science days of requirements and presented in a way of what the system needs to do, but here we're grounding in what humans want and need from the system. So as a fundraiser, I want to be able to easily see who has doubled their donation this year so that I can specially recognize and acknowledge that. And that's an example of a user story. And with it comes that acceptance criteria written again in human-centered ways. I can easily go to some place to see a list of who has doubled their donation this year or this month. And guess what? That also becomes how we're going to test the system, because now it's written in human-centered ways that the technology needs to support. And it grounds us in what people need and what their experience is. And then here again, we're setting the realistic expectations. There's the scope of work that we're going to be able to do now and the next phase. But along the way, I always like to remind organizations I work with that there's a lot of context happening within your organization. There's other changes going on. There might be heavy business periods coming up, or growth that you're going through, or different things that are happening outside of just the technology. And also so that we can prepare. Maybe there's an annual report coming up. Okay, great. So, how do we prepare the system and the data to meet those needs? And then system performance. And I'm very, very, very happy to have this on recording that I am thrilled that the well-architected framework and group is back with Salesforce. I think we cannot have AI and technology systems and without great data, without great architecture, and without thinking about the future in mind. Well, that's a good point in the chat. Um, and I think that, it's how do we create the systems, right? There's some guidance in there of what we can do to make sure that we're designing, solutions that meet needs and that are going to, help us adapt as we move on, because we know businesses keep changing. So again, back to more questions. Building and testing, kind of with that Legos analogy there, is about being iterative and agile. Long gone, I hope, are the days where we only just develop for a long, long time and then hand it back to the users. We're really grounding ourselves and prioritizing those user stories we have. What are we going to do first in the first sprint, for example, which might be 1, 2, 3 weeks long? We're going to then test that, get feedback on it, and then go to the next set of stories while making improvements along the way. And asking for feedback. You've all were saying that in the chat, along the way, not at the end, not when we've already delivered it. But early on, because you may know that the earlier you catch something that isn't right, whether it's a bug or a feature that isn't what people were looking for, or something with the user experience that's off, the less expensive it will be. Versus if it's already well into production and people are ready to go use the system, now we have to maybe pause or roll something back. So using that acceptance criteria that was built within the user story to become our test scripts. Great. You said if that you want to be able to do this, and here's the human-centered way you outline that. So then here are the steps that match that could you please go test that in the system to make sure that it's meeting the needs that you have. And back to being an intentional, and diversity of users involved in that training process too, not just the project team or the governance group. Because again, those end users that are in it, in the day-to-day are going to have an amazing perspective of what's working and what still needs to be tweaked. Okay, I think we still have time. Sometimes I take out, depending on the presentation, some prompts. Maybe this one we can have in the chat, but also if you want to come off mute, that's okay. What's some examples of training you've been involved in or have led that have went well? When have you been part of a training and you felt like, okay, this was helpful to me, I understand it, I can take that back and apply? I'm seeing energy, organize, listening and applying what we're learning during the training, show and tells. Yeah, and telling the story of the user as you understand it. So mirroring back what you're hearing, and again, keeping it grounded in their language. Yeah, and involve the end users in the training process and the step-by-step instructions. And I love the cheat sheets and the how-to the documentation. Interactive. We have a shout out for Vanessa through Click Coaching. Yeah, I like the concept of coaching. How do we partner with people on their journey? Small tutorials, adding humor, absolutely. Preview, view, and review. Allowing people time. Yep. Making training fun, relevant, and memorable. I'm going to give a huge shout out to Reby De La Paz. Dreamforce 2017 session, I think, that was on how to make change management and training memorable and fun. And from that, I built upon this concept that I'm hearing in the chat too of let's demo this for you. Short bites. You'll have your laptops. You can try it out. And then we're going to gamify it, just like you see on Trailhead. Why do we gamify? Why are there the quizzes on Trailhead? Because if we remember also from earlier school days, the quizzes are a way to reinforce the knowledge. The more we can do to make it interactive and fun and engaging, and also revisit the key concepts, the longer that material will stay, because I think in that same Dreamforce presentation, I gotta go see if I can find it and get you the statistic back then. It was a high percentage of as soon as people walk out of that room an hour later, depending on the design of the training, people forget it, right? On to the next business meeting, on to the next goal of the day, didn't even get to practice it. Okay. And I've definitely been there. And this is also about knowing our audience and back to the different learning styles people need. So we saw examples of quick references and showing and demos and hands-on and guides, giving people a variety of ways of interacting so that they can really learn the way that's going to meet their needs and be more successful for them. I like to, again, invite the super users, and I've often modeled the train the trainer concept, which also helps if you're a solo admin, for example, that you can, better multiply your efforts by showing people the system, and then they can be advocates and put it within the language of their business units too. I'm a firm believer in bite-sized training, so that might be 25, 30 minutes of a module at the most at a time and some breaks. I've definitely been in all-day trainings, and sometimes that's just the way the format is or it works. But for me, I've tend to retain better when it's sort of broken up into smaller chunks. I have time to think about it, practice it, talk to people about it. But again, whatever the needs of the culture and your organization are, keep that in mind. And we can embed the training right into Salesforce. The help text, the rich text guidance. You could build something on the home screen. Just different ways. There's different apps and tools for that too. I love open office hours. These are chances for some users love to just drop in. And I don't know, during the training, I didn't have a question or didn't want to ask it then, but I'd love to have some more one-on-one or small group time to work through the concepts and just ask questions. So maybe that's once, twice a week, whatever, half an hour of a time. No RSVP, no reservation required. Just drop in. And then I'm huge into documenting, these days, especially more of the why, I would say, because whether that's through the description field, right, or a small document or a diagram, so that we can refer back to, well, why did we design this that way then? So then we know how we can change it when the business needs change. I also have written, though, from role to role, admin guide or handbook to hand to the next person, so they understand more of the context and the interactions of different things, the automations that are going on. And I definitely think that can be helpful. And then feedback and requests we talked about. This is being intentional with continuous improvement. We have the importance of governance as a group that can review the feedback, see what the requests are, consider what's going on in the business. And I'd love to set a cadence for check-in with my business partners. Maybe in some organizations, I've had 4 or 5 business units, and I meet with them on whatever cadence they want, once a week, every other week, once a month. And we're going over what's happening in your business, what's coming up that we should prepare for. What challenges are you running in? What are those top tickets of support that you've been putting in? And are you getting the needs you have? Or what's that next change that we're going to roll out? How do we get your department ready for it? And within that is some system. It could be the case object in Salesforce, could be, a form that, generates through a spreadsheet or a Kanban view or app, where people can see the intake of their requests, they can track the status, and they can see when it's been resolved. That again has a huge amount on the transparency and honesty of what's happening. I gave you feedback. Where'd that go? Oh, I understand. Okay, so that's something that is going to be addressed in the next release, or and that gets to kind of the final point. There is, while we have all this planning and preparation, I do my best to also try to include small wins along the way, things that are low effort but would have a huge impact. Things that people have been asking for that maybe we just haven't had a chance to get to yet. And I remind us that when we're thinking of what we can do within a period of time, 1 week, 2 week sprints, whatever the release that we're going through, we also need time for the production support of that system and the maintenance, the releases that Salesforce has coming out. So again, having a system and then needing to go over those top needs and prioritizing, but also considering what else is happening in the organization, provides a way that we know, well, what is it that we're going to do that's going to really add value this month? And then just briefly, just categories of features. By the way, look out when you're at conferences and user groups. There's amazing Trailblazers who have presentations that get into, demoing specific examples of user experience and user interface. And so here's just a brief summary of some examples. Lightning's been out a while, but I really appreciated, as a Lightning champion back then, how there was a lot of thought of, well, we're not going to just take Classic and put a shiny new UI on it. We want to think how we can, make the features and better. How do we build upon that? And so, for example, we had Path come out, different branding we can do. And so with there now, I love dynamic forms, dynamic actions, dynamic related lists. I mean, it really does empower, the admins and the end users to create experience together, where they can see information again in a way that's not overwhelming, but that serves the needs of people and the way we organize the information that they're going to need it. I mentioned earlier the quick action buttons. I love it. You just hit a button, fill out these few things, the computer knows the rest, and you're on your way. Again, we've mentioned the guidance and context, but I also love to embed a report or a dashboard right within people's workflows. So maybe they're on an account record and they can now quickly see the various ways that account has supported, through donations this year. By year, by type of revenue that they've supported. I didn't have to go run a separate report. I didn't have to go record by record. I didn't have to run a list view. It's just right there, and I can click on that chart, and it will bring me to the underlying detail behind it. That's why I love dashboards too. Because again, I think we need to get to visualizing the data so that we can see more than just at the detail level what is happening. So people can explore, have those insights, and have fun with the information. And then, always be able to drill down and know, well, where is it coming from? So then we can also spot data quality issues and fix those too. Sometimes you've heard of concepts of dashboard to zero. Shout out to Evan Ponter and others who've done that, where we can understand, okay, before we put this report out to our board of directors, let's run that other dashboard of some key common data entry situations that we're coming across so that we can correct those. And automation's huge. I don't like to put automation before understanding the business, but there I see the value in freeing up people's time. I mean, as admins, business analysts, architects, developers, consultants, everything, right? End users, we have a lot going on. And my belief on recording here is that AI shouldn't be replacing the people. I think it should be taking what's already an overwhelming situation on both the customer side and organization sides, or within the nonprofits I work with, and freeing up people's capacity to then lean into the parts of their roles that they find more joyful, and in those human interactions that are more meaningful. So I see the potential of automation and features like, what was Einstein, or still has the Einstein features, or Agentforce, in ways that it can reduce the mundane. And then people who are already feeling swamped and overwhelmed by so much to do in a day can focus on things that are more joyful, which then, we know happy employees equals happy interactions, usually with customers, which then, it's a nice cycle, right? So I think it's important to prioritize that, because it does have a huge business impact when people are happier. So I'm going to skip this and go to, what are the possible outcomes? What is all this about empathy and joy and feeling? And I just want to see, what's this going to mean to our business? What's this going to mean? And so the possible outcomes is a lot on the slide. You'll have access to the slide deck, but we're really talking about more time for people on their gifts, systems, as you've said, that a variety of people can help shape and use. We have better collaboration, there's fewer clicks, the mundane has been automated, and so on here. And I think that, again, is what our goal ultimately with empathetic and joyful user experiences, and with all the skills you all bring, is how do we build systems that really empower people to lean in on what they know and do best. And so we've had, I've seen some, I think might need some help on some of the questions that have come through. I'll kind of leave this here, just, be in the slide deck, but, all of you attending groups like this, you're already learning and sharing together. Huge shout out to the community-led dreaming events. I think that's definitely where it's at for the learning and sharing and networking, through the Salesforce admin and the architect site. There's lots of resources there. Shout out to Jody Herbeck's book, Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin. But definitely whether you want to explore these certs or, table that for later, there's a lot of amazing resources within these two trail mixes for the user experience and strategy designer certification that can expand on a lot more of this, of how do we keep grounded in what people need from systems. So I want to, again, thank you all. Thank you for participating. Thank you for adding your wisdom here. Thank you for inviting me in here. And I'd love to hear what questions people have.
Thank you, Daniel. Everybody, please give your love to Daniel in the chat, please. I see we've got clapping on the cameras. Appreciate it. I don't have any Q&A right now, but the session was very interactive.
I do appreciate all the feedback coming in.
Yeah, so the session was pretty interactive. So I think we're getting close on time. So if anybody has any burning questions, Daniel, would you be able to maybe handle those in the chat?
My biggest advice, another takeaway, is keep doing what you're doing. Keep showing up. Keep learning with each other. Keep thinking about the people and why we're doing all of this to begin with. And you all have a lot of talent and experience. So keep knowing your worth. Prioritize that self-care. Keep showing up and sharing what you know, because it does make a difference. People do care.
Thanks, everybody. If anybody has any burning questions for Daniel, please throw them in the chat. I want to, if it's okay, pivot to some of our news for the month. Cool. Daniel, can you hear me?
Yep, Vanessa mentioned and pinned that Richard had an amazing demo of great features. So on the YouTube channel for this group, there's a lot you can catch up and view there too. And I'm seeing, how do we handle requirements for AI? I think we're back to, regardless of what the tech is that can solve, we're back to what is it that people are experiencing that is just not fun, taking too much time, too much effort, and what are maybe some small ways we can pilot having AI take a piece of that task off people's plate, but keeping humans at the center of that. I do believe in that. So what is something we could do? Maybe it's a common question people are asking that could be answered. And again, giving people the choice. Sometimes people want to self-serve. Sometimes they're like, you know what, I've done that. I really just want to talk to someone.
Hey, Daniel, can you hear me okay? I don't think Daniel can hear us. Okay.
I didn't hear Vanessa. That's interesting. Sometimes I feel like the audio splits on this platform. I cannot. It's strange.
Is it only
Go for it,
Vanessa,
Vanessa.
or can you hear
Pivoting to
others?
news.
Cool. Thank you, Daniel. All right. If anybody has any burning questions for Daniel, please feel free to throw those in the chat. In the meantime, let's pivot to some news. And then, all right. So again, thank you guys so much for being part of Daniel's session. I loved all the interaction. So thank you very much, Daniel. We look forward to your book. We are now going to pivot to some Salesforce badass BA news and opportunities. I have a lot to say this month. Spooky season, so it's just going to be scary news. This isn't scary. You have, well, maybe it is a little bit scary. You only have 2 months left, really, to get that Agentforce Specialist certification for free. So if you are interested in taking that training, getting that free certification, you have 2 months. I will keep saying this every month because it's still going to be a $200 cert come January. So if you have been putting it off, maybe this is your reminder. Next, there is a free Salesforce fundamentals session. I can see about maybe throwing that in the chat if anybody wants to grab that. But Salesforce has actually been putting a little bit of effort into enablement again, which I'm actually kind of excited about. And so for folks that are newer to the ecosystem, might want to check out some of these Salesforce fundamental sessions. But I will also preface this with a caveat. They are very, let's sell you a bunch of clouds and Agentforce heavy. So if you can get past the marketing stuff, there is some good stuff in there. We had actually somebody had messaged me privately and said they tried so hard to tie every damn thing to Agentforce except when they were talking to the panel. So there is a really good panel session in these if you're going to the business analyst fundamentals. They said if they took a shot for every time that Agentforce was mentioned, they would be dead. So just be careful about that if you start a drinking game before going to one of these fundamental courses. But I do have the recording of one of them. If you guys did miss the BA one, it's I have the password for the recording. If anybody wants to message me on LinkedIn, happy to share it. There was also some weird stuff in there. I'm probably going to do more of a LinkedIn post on this, but I want folks, especially folks that are newer to Salesforce business analysis, to be mindful that, again, if Salesforce is doing this enablement, they are very, very focused right now on being an AI company. The fact that they even called Dreamforce an AI, an AI conference, which I was like, did we forget that we're CRM? Is, again, be mindful of where you are getting your information. So when they're saying use Flow Builder to generate accurate process maps, no, you can't generate an accurate process map if you're not talking to humans. Looking at Flow is not going to generate an accurate process map. So just again, take it with a grain of salt. Get your information from multiple sources. It's one of the reasons why we're here and we share information. But there certainly is information here, and I don't think it is, especially for free, is a bad thing to go to. There's also help on the way. Salesforce actually reached out to me because I complained on the internet, as I tend to do, and so I'm going to be meeting with Salesforce to hopefully give them some feedback on some of that BA fundamentals, so that we can really, I think collectively, and I think that's the power of this group to a certain extent. How do we collectively decide on what good looks like? Because I think that is sorely lacking in Trailhead. I'm going to be meeting with Salesforce. I'm bringing Pay along, and hopefully this fundamentals course, if they keep offering it, will keep getting better. Speaking of feedback making a difference, I thought that this was a really interesting thing that happened recently. So if folks have not been on Salesforce Knowledge recently, so help.salesforce.com, Salesforce actually took off the search bar. Like just one day decided to replace the search bar with Agentforce. So you could not find a help article unless you were forced to have a conversation with Agentforce. And this unsurprisingly, caused a lot of aggravation in the Salesforce ecosystem. And so I think this is a good example where when we use our voice and speak up, will they always listen? No, but I think it's important to speak up. So Tom Bassett put something on the Idea Exchange, and I think it was probably one of the most, like the fastest upvoted idea in quite a while, because within days, Salesforce put in a response, and starting on November 15th, they're going to bring that search bar back. Why they're going to take a month to bring back functionality, I don't know, but either way, I think this is especially when we look at things, and to Daniel's point, the idea of having empathetic user experiences. Um, when you look at the idea exchange and actually look at the correspondence that came from Tom Bassett's idea on please bring the search bar back, like duh, um, you'll see that they based this decision on data. They didn't speak to anybody. They didn't speak to the end users. And so for me, this was an example of they didn't use business analysis. So they didn't speak to their stakeholders. They didn't understand all the use cases. How are people accessing this information? And if they, they didn't have good solution architecture because they were solving for the wrong problem. If they thought that agent force was the way to solve this that I mean, unless the problem was we need to up our agent force stats, they were solving for the wrong thing. So again, make your voices heard. And this is just one of those things that I thought was an interesting example in our ecosystem that I wanted to share. Jason, is was it it was just bad. It was just bad BA, exactly. Also some interesting news. You guys may know Elements Cloud, even if you don't know Elements Cloud. If you have been on the business analysis side of Trailhead, universal process notation is something that was promoted by Elements Cloud. And so if you if you really to do universal process notation, yes, while you can do it in other programs, I would say it is most popularized by Elements Cloud. Elements Cloud has had a change in leadership. So Ian Gotts is still going to be on as an advisor, but he's passing the reins on to Zavary, who I actually did a white paper with him and Jody Herbeck, who Daniel Gorton also mentioned last year. Um, and so I just wanted to bring this up just because I think this does have an impact on the business analysis community in Salesforce in general. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, especially since Elements Cloud is such a force when it comes to Salesforce business process mapping, that it's an important thing to keep an eye on. I also was wondering, and this is, the conspiracy corner of our news section, if it had anything to do with this acquisition. So Salesforce is acquiring this company, Apramore, which has business process mining capabilities. So it's just reading the tea leaves. It's giving me the sense that, again, like trying to replace more human interaction with AI. Like I think there's a way where we meet in the middle. Certainly it is hard to just speak to humans and not look at the technology and see what's actually happening. But I think it's also equally as difficult to just look at the technology and know what's happening. So like that slide I had a little while back where I said, that Salesforce is saying, "Oh, just look at flow and then you'll know what's happening." No, that's not how that works. But also, you can talk to people but not actually know what the system's doing. So there is something in the middle, and I don't think that this is a bad thing that Agent Force is going to have increased process mining capabilities potentially in the future. But I think it'll be important to think about how we would leverage that information as business analysts when we are putting together our business process maps, when we're putting together a full picture of the current state and the future states that we want. So again, another thing to keep an eye on, and I would say particularly in light of the Elements Cloud aspect, I had always kind of thought that maybe Salesforce would be acquiring them, but we'll see. It's interesting things happening these days. So throwing that out there. Also, I'm going to be doing my first non-Salesforce big speaking gig. Global Business Analysis Day, which is not Salesforce specific, is run by the International Institute of Business Analysis. It is a free event, it is a worldwide event, and it is a virtual event. And I will be a speaker. For whatever reason, I am on the Australian agenda, but that's cool. And I'll be doing a session called Fake It Till You Make It, Thriving in Your First BA Role. It actually is the first session that I ever did virtually back in 2020. I think we were like heavy in pandemic times when I first ran the session, and I've learned so much since then. So I'm excited to update this session and present it to the larger business analysis community, including, of course, our Salesforce BA community. But wanted to share this as a resource for the rest of you guys too, especially in light of how this ecosystem is evolving. I think being able to expand our knowledge is going to be really important. And to that extent, I actually also want to note that we are thinking about putting a panel together for the end of the year. Right now, working title is Have BA Skills Will Travel, but if folks know of folks or are folks that have done Salesforce projects and non-Salesforce projects as a Salesforce business analyst and taken your skills from Salesforce BA to other projects, I would love to talk to you and see about, tapping into some of that knowledge. Also, this is a LinkedIn thing that I'd put up. I know we're running out of time, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But as BAs, I thought it was really interesting just to start thinking about what is a good rule of thumb for user acceptance testing. So at what point are you considering user acceptance testing? How much time are you putting into it? And how are you, again, with that change management piece, thinking through what what you're going to ask for, what your expectations are, so that you can set your team and your client or your stakeholders, depending if you're internal or external, up for success. um, Generally what I found from the comments was that people were said that good rule of thumb is set aside 25% of development time for UAT. I have rarely actually seen that in practice, but I thought that that was, maybe it's just not in practice because people just don't know. I would love to hear in the comments if you guys have any thoughts about what a good rule of thumb is for UAT. Of course, nothing is perfect when we're going into Salesforce projects, particularly agile ones. But I thought certainly a good piece of food for thought for this community. And on that note, I hope everybody sticks around. We still have a few minutes of some unrecorded chat. Maybe we can talk about all the things we did instead of Dreamforce this year. But I'm going to say goodbye to the folks on YouTube right now.